And so in a lot of cases, it's about seeking out kind of not only what people say they want or what they're frustrated with, but understanding that they're putting enough energy to learn and to do something about it. Because there's a lot of times I always think about it as like people will always complain about something. So like when I do a workshop or like a workshop face to face, one of the things I always do is I turn the temperature way down because the number one complaint I always get is it's too cold, right? So I'm designing the way in which I actually do that. And so part of this is to actually then be able to make sure you understand what we call meaningful or struggling moments that matter to people, right? And that they're willing to stop doing one thing to start doing something else. And that comes through basically observation and being able to dissect, if you will, the purchasing process, as well as understanding kind of the times where people wanted to buy something and they didn't, or when they bought something and used it for something completely different.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the CVO Live. I'm honored and thrilled and happy to be here together with Bob Moesta. Hello, Bob.
Hey, Valentin, how are you?
I'm fine, and I'm really excited to make this episode happen together. To give a bit of context, we're going to chat about the jobs to be done. Theory, we're going to chat about how to apply the customer value principles in your e-commerce stores and in your businesses as well. And pretty much that's it. Let's get the party started. Bob, the first question that I have for you, how would you define yourself after this life experience up until this moment?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question because it's, I'll say the first thing that I think I'm most proud of is being a father, but I think after that, I've been a builder my whole life, builder of products, builder, assembler of things. And as I get older, I think the thing I like to build most is methods and tools for thinking about how to build, right? So it's the meta part of it. So in the end, I would always, if somebody asks me what I do, I always say I'm a builder and I'm an innovator and I'm a mentor.
Excellent. So, is this definition evolving, or it has evolved to
I think it's always evolving, but I think that my mom would agree that I came out of the womb as an engineer because I started breaking things probably at least by one or two, but then I realized how to fix things. So to me, it was. I think I've always been destined to kind of be a builder, but I think at the same time I've evolved and become more of a teacher and a mentor as well. Because of people who have taught and mentored me, it's kind of like it's my turn to kind of pay back, if you will.
Yeah, and I know for a fact that you're doing this and you're doing it very, very well. So,
yeah. Well, I have. So here's the thing: is I have, like the thing to realize is I'm dyslexic, and for the most part, I was told as a high school student to basically be a baggage handler at the airport. But these four people who are mentors of mine, who I had the opportunity to work with and side by side and to learn from, they've taught me how to innovate and how to build in a better way. And to be honest, the experience of doing that and working with tens of thousands of people, if you will, but it's all about a community of being able to build. So I think it's realizing that you have to learn how to, this is not something you're born with, it's something you learn. And as you learn and hone and refine it, there are people who help you. And ultimately, I can't pay back the people who helped me, so I have to actually pay it forward to help them. Yeah. That's kind of my underlying view of where I'm at in my life.
Yeah, and I think it must be fulfilling to be in a position to be aware about the impact that you're having in other people's lives, and to actually pay it forward. Bob, tell us a bit about the first time when you've met Professor Clayton Christensen.
Yeah, so the interesting part about meeting Clay is we had been doing some work and we needed some help, and we had reached out to somebody at the Harvard Business School, and the person that we were working with was very smart, obviously, but also very expensive. And so we tried to figure out a way in which to say, like, well, we need somebody else who's kind of more of a junior professor, or somebody who's rather new, to help us with this specific project we were on. And they recommended us to go meet Clay. And when we went in to see Clay, the first thing is Clay, he was very friendly to say he would talk with us and sit down with us. But the very first time I met him, I just remember going to shake his hand and my hand disappearing, because turns out Clay is 6'10", 6'9", and he's just a very, very large man. And it's one of those things where you just kind of, he's like this big giant, but he's like the jolly, the gentle green giant. He's just very, very humble and curious and learning. And at some point in time, it was one of those things where I'll say in a very first meeting, we very, very much clicked, because he was always about asking good questions, and I was always asking about good questions. And so we would spar on terms of how to frame the right question to think about something. And then he also was a visual thinker. And so right away, it was one of those things where within, an hour or 2 hours of our first meeting, it was like one of those things where we feel like you could just almost feel like the synergy of working, like helping each other. So it was a very, very special moment. It was back in 94.
Yeah. A lot of time. So for the context, can you please share with our audience how the jobs theory evolved, and what is the, let's say, what is the basis of this theory?
Yep. So I actually started doing a lot of product development and formalized product development at Ford Motor Company back in the 80s. And they had something called quality function deployment, which is a methodology really geared around trying to gather the voice of the customer. And one of the things that really kind of hindered me was this ability to realize, like, at some point they would do surveys around what people wanted, and then people would vote, and then they'd average them out. And what I started to realize is that context actually changed what things were important to people. And so this is back in the early or mid late 80s, where I started to realize, like, there was a very, context mattered, wrapped around what was important to people, and why they bought might not be why they used. And so as I started to work through kind of several different products and product lines, it got to the point where just knowing who somebody was and knowing what they say they wanted didn't necessarily turn out to be the reason why they bought the product. And so it was this notion of we have to dig deeper and unpack what people mean by things. And so by the early 90s, we had built a methodology around kind of doing this and figuring out how to understand not only who, but when, where, and why, and building methodologies wrapped around kind of doing that. And then for the last 30 years, I've been honing and refining and using it both in startups that I've done, and then basically with Clay, and with others like people at the Christensen Institute.
Excellent. So the jobs theory, it really changed my perspective about marketing. To give some context, I was so certain that who is the most important question to answer, and not why, when, and where. So
Yep.
the answers to all these questions are revealing what's behind the purchase decision. I must tell you that we turned around our whole company after doing the jobs to be done, applying the jobs to be done methodology on our own company. And
Yep.
How do you think this is going to evolve? I think at this moment is pretty well known in the product development area in the tech industry. However, in marketing is not that well adopted. You've also wrote a book about applying the jobs theory in sales with the demand side sales book. How do you see this evolving?
So the interesting part is I've probably done most of the work around product and services. So it's more about building kind of again, kind of as I'll say an engineer, I always like to build things. And so it was about learning enough to know how to put things together and what to put in and what not to put in some cases. But over the years, it's been used like this is, I almost see this as fundamental research that people have to do to understand the entire business, because we've used the research itself to help both with product and with marketing and with sales, and to be honest, we've done it with mergers and acquisitions of kind of like what's the synergy of strategy, if you will. And then recently I've been using it a lot to actually I've been studying why people leave one company to go to another company, and realizing that employees hire companies as much as companies hire employees. And by describing the progress you want to make as an employee is actually way more important than just accepting the position they describe. And so it's one of those things where jobs has been one of those where I used it as primarily my hack around kind of trying to understand what people wanted for product. It now has turned into this thing where it's helping people kind of in many different areas, and it can help a company in all different kinds of aspects inside the company.
That's fantastic, and I think the principle behind the jobs, one of the principles behind jobs theory is that the behavior is following a certain progress that the whoever is doing the action is trying to make. And one important thing is the struggling moment. Can you please tell us now a bit about how can you unveil the struggling moment? How you, let's say, what kind of questions you should be asking, and how should you be asking those questions so that you can understand the very moment when the struggle.
Got it. So while I answer that question, you might want to just see if you can switch your mic. I think you're on the lapel mic, and you need to go to the other mic. So just check, because you should be clearer than you sound. So the way in which to reveal the struggling moments is partially about being able to so first of all, I do not develop or work on any product, project, and or service unless we understand the struggling moments we're going after, right? The other part is that struggling moments are hard to see sometimes, but they're not just about people complaining about something. They're actually more about actually helping understanding kind of the progress people are trying to make, and almost the friction that's in the way to actually hinder them from making that progress. And so in a lot of cases, it's about seeking out kind of not only what people say they want or what they're frustrated with, but understanding that they're putting enough energy to learn and to do something about it. Because there's a lot of times, I always think about it as like people will always complain about something. So like when I do a workshop or like a workshop face to face, one of the things I always do is I turn the temperature way down, because the number one complaint I always get is it's too cold, right? So I'm designing the way in which I actually do that. And so part of this is to actually then be able to make sure you understand what we call meaningful or struggling moments that matter to people, right? And that they're willing to stop doing one thing to start doing something else. And that comes through basically observation and being able to dissect, if you will, the purchasing process, as well as understanding kind of the times where people wanted to buy something and they didn't, or when they bought something and used it for something completely different, because they're all struggling to figure out kind of what progress they want to make. And so to me, I spend a lot of time almost like truffle hunting for mushrooms, right? Or for truffles, right? It's like the whole aspect of being able to find like where those struggling moments are. That's where I think real growth comes from, is by addressing those new emerging struggling moments people have.
Yeah. Is my mic okay now, Bob?
It's not, but that's okay. You can keep talking. Do
you think it's the other mic, right? So I'm hearing myself.
Yep.
All right, so we'll try to work with.
Do we have any questions from people that we want to answer, or is anybody kind of tapped into it, or
yeah,
I mean, we could.
If you have any questions, you can address them over here or on LinkedIn live as well.
Yep, Catherine.
Hi, so I'm just getting started with the Jobs to be Done framework. Going to be reaching out to customers probably today. Just wondering, how do you frame it when you reach out to a customer to ask them to do this in-depth interview?
Yeah, so good question. So one of the things is it's mostly first of all, it's all about them and not about you and your product. And so the first thing to realize is like, you don't like at some point you might have some clues of why they might have bought, but what you want to do is almost say that I have no idea what was going on in their lives at the time that said today's the day we should hire your product. And so part of this is, so the way I usually say it is, look, I don't have a long list of questions because people get nervous about questions. I say, you know what, I just want to hear your story of how you decide, basically how you found us and decided today was the day that we had to, that you were trying to use and what you were hoping for, right? There are no right or wrong questions or answers. And if I ask a question that you don't want to answer, you just say pass. But for the most part, the best way to think about this is as a documentary of like, I'm just trying to document like, what was going on in the business or what was going on that said today's the day you needed this thing, right? And 9 times out of 10 it starts with just having people tell me the background of where they're at, and then when did they buy, and then going backwards and saying, well, what was going on, why did that happen, and trying to get the sequence of events. And people get so caught up in telling the story because they've usually never connected all the dots of how they got there, that they're actually as curious as you are.
It's like a meta perception, right? So they look over what they finally analyze themselves and their buying process as well. Bob, I've been applying the jobs theory.
There you go. That's
the mic is working. Yeah,
that's the mic I was counting on.
Excellent. So I have applied the jobs theory to 8 companies already, and I must say that I'm getting finally there in terms of. Yeah, in terms of deciphering what's going on. And I want to address a topic which I think is important in my own journey to unveil what's going on over there, which is the topic of, let's say, people over trying to help you when they answer, and trying to make it look like you're okay, and they like you've done the right job, and it's like they are being asked now how they've made it, but if the experience was
and they want to tell you all about the product. So in some cases, Catherine, this is another good kind of tip, is like, they're like, if you're there to interview them about the product, the first thing they have in their head is all the stuff they want to tell you about the product. Oh my God, I love this. I like that. And they're like, I'll also have like, boy, we could fix this. We could fix that. In some cases, you might want to get all of that out in the beginning and go like, oh my gosh, this has been so helpful. Can I just ask a couple follow-up questions? And then that's when I go into the real interview, right? Because I want them to empty their head, because otherwise, if you're asking them all these questions, they're trying to hold all that stuff in their head while you're asking these other questions. And so part of it is if they really want to give feedback, that like just sense the fact that they're trying to do that, and then gather the feedback, but almost take the language. And when they say, oh my God, I love this feature, ask, well, why do you love that feature? What does that feature enable you to do that you couldn't do before? Right? Something like that. And so part of it is to unpack the phrases that they use, but you gotta let them, like, they want to help you. And at the end of the day, you don't want their help. You actually want to understand the real struggling moments that they had to get there. Right? Yeah. There's also a big distinction between what they thought going in and what they see in hindsight. So like, there might be a feature they didn't even know about going in, but in hindsight, like, oh my God, I love this feature. That actually has nothing to do with why they bought. Right?
Yeah, that
so
was
part of it is to separate out those two things. Yeah.
To give some context to the audience here, which some of them are acquainted about the customer value optimization methodology, jobs to be done is the part which is occurring after you have customers that actually bought products from your store, and you want to apply the jobs to be done methodology preferably to customers which recently bought, so that they have it fresh in their minds. And
so the other way to apply it is not only if you already have customers, but if, for example, you're starting and you don't have anything, what I would say is that what we usually do is we go look at companies then that would say, like, if we build what we're talking about, what will people stop using because of what we built?
Yeah.
right? Because in our world, there's no new consumption. It's like people have to, there's no more time in the world. People have to stop doing something to do something new, right? And if we can understand that aspect of it, that's how we actually then learn about it. And so, a lot of times I'll be working with a company that has a brand new technology, but it's then going back to say, like, what will people stop using if people buy your thing? And that's where we start with the jobs to be done as well, because at some point the jobs don't really change. The jobs are almost very consistent through time and space. What changes is the hiring and firing criteria because of the struggling moments.
Yeah. And one of my experience was, and I want to address this thing, is that when you got to this phase, when you get to the phase of doing jobs to be done interviews, I think there are going to be so many aha moments that you are not simply expecting. For me, it's always like this. And I have this thrill of saying, oh yeah, that's the job, because you have patterns and you suddenly see that this customer said that, but that's pretty much the same as the other customer. But they are looking differently. Maybe one is is a woman, the other one is a man, one is elder, and the other one is younger. And I want to address this topic about the jobs, which I think it's, for me, it was really eye-opening, that you don't have to focus on like a fictional buyer persona stating that this is your client, it's Sophie and it's 42 years old, and then sell to Sophie.
Well, I think there's two things is that personas are about people, and most of personas have been built because that's the way we buy media, right? Like, I got to be able to target people, and media is all like where to place, how to place. It's like who's there. That's how most people are selling the media part. So that's really where personas came from, but it's not very useful from a development perspective, because at some point in time, it's like, I need to know what they want to do. And what you realize is that context and outcome drive more understanding of what to do than who they are. A lot of times it's about where they are and when they are and why they're doing it. And that I always talk about, there's a difference between what I could say a thesaurus problem and a dictionary problem, meaning some people use the same words but have actually completely different meanings for it, right? And then there's other people who use very different words, but they actually have the exact same meaning for it. And so part of this is to actually really get down to not the words they use, but the intent of what they mean behind it and why they mean it, right? That's the key of being able to dig past. I always call it, there's like 3 layers. There's a pablum layer of people saying, like, well, I like it. It's fun. It's cool. It's like, but it actually doesn't mean anything in terms of what to do from a product or from a marketing or even from a sales perspective. So as you unpack it, you get down to what I call the fantasy and nightmare layer, where people over exaggerate. And then eventually you get down to this causal layer. So that's why these interviews take, in some cases, a simple purchase sometimes will take 45 minutes to an hour to get somebody to actually detail out what exactly happened emotionally, socially, and functionally.
Yeah. And to share a bit, one of my first experiences, I was working with a company called Hush Blankets. They sell weighted blankets. Yeah. Their narrative about their own product, and I think Peter Drucker was completely right when he said that most companies don't know what they are selling, why they are selling, and why the customers are buying.
Yep.
And they thought that they are selling the cuddling feeling, the cuddling effect of a weighted blanket when you sit in front of the TV and you're on the couch and whatever. After doing these jobs to be done interviews, I've seen that people which were there, they were actually having real serious insomnia problems. And the main thing that was repeated was the fact that they didn't want to be knocked out by the sleeping pills.
Right. Yep.
And that was a thing which was so impactful, because it wasn't about the cuddling feeling. It was about insomnia and real sleep disorders. Yep. And another thing was that even though help me sleep well, but also help me not sleep too well, not be knocked out.
Or not be groggy in the morning, the side effect of the sleeping pill. So this is where most people don't think of, they think of blankets competing with blankets, and maybe blankets competing with the hut, but they don't think of blankets competing with ZQL or some kind of sleep aid, right?
Yeah.
And so this is where, when you do these interviews, you start to see what I call the real competition as opposed to the industry competition. We a lot of times we have the separation between what we call the supply side of the world, which is the industry that you're in, and how does it make money, and how do you actually build product, and the demand side, which is basically how do people pull things, your products, into their lives. And you start to realize there's two kinds of value. There's building corporate value, profit, and then there's actually delivering customer value, which is different, because it's about helping them make progress. And so the separation of those two, it's really about making those two domains connect.
Yeah. What I find it really impactful is that even though it's part of the whole customer research, which is one of the most neglected part in marketing right now, jobs to be done is really impactful nowadays, when we have this advertising costs going through the roof, thanks to cookies, thanks to iOS 15 and so on. And many marketers are trying to not to change the narrative and the messaging and the positioning. They are trying to do this local optimization, to tweak the ads, the CTRs and the creatives without even understanding what they are actually selling to their peers.
That's right. What's happening is they're trying to go deeper and find the subtleties, almost like the needle in the haystack. And what you really want to do is take a step back and figure out a different place to advertise, or different situations. So for example, when I built houses, one of the things I realized that was critical for people who are downsizers, people who had a large house and kind of going to a smaller condo, that one of the things that they all did is they all checked the obituaries, because they have friends who pass away. And so I moved my advertising from the real estate section to the obituaries. And I didn't tell them about the house, but it's like, time to move, time to figure this out. And I got a 37% increase in traffic, and I got a 70% reduction in cost, because at some point I'm in a different space talking about very different things. And to be honest, it resonated for people, and we heard that through interviews. And so part of this is to realize, like, the optimization is not about tweaking. Sometimes the optimization, to your point, Valentin, is about taking a step back and looking at it from a completely different perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And one thing that you will be able to do after the jobs to be done analysis is that you can change your narrative. And this is so impactful, not only on marketing, but it's impactful in the product assortment. It's impactful in how you sell. It's impactful in how you train your customer support, because you're more empathetic, right? If you sell the cuddling effect and your customer service says hello, and they are pretty happy, they are not empathizing with people which are having sleep disorders, and their moral is not that high.
And again, here's the thing is, there might be people who are buying it for cuddling because they feel lonely. Other people are using it because they can't sleep. And part of it is customer service has to almost know the 3 or 4 different pathways of why people are buying. So they don't over feature, like, oh, it can do this and this and this, and it's not relevant to the cuddling, job, if you will. And so part of it is to actually understand those differences and help the organization understand those differences, right? I think one of the bigger benefits that most people don't appreciate, I just helped a company where they had one person kind of doing all the interviews. And what we did is we took a step back and said, no, we want actually cross-functional teams to be part of the interviews and listen and debrief, because they're starting to now build language that's not based on the inside of the company, but from the outside, and then having clear definitions of when somebody says, boy, they want it easy. There's 4 different definitions of easy. What easy are we talking about? And so it's that kind of thing where helping the organization have a language about the customer as opposed to a distilled language about the customer is very powerful.
Which are the 4 definitions of easy?
You have them? Or do you want to know them?
I want to know them, yeah.
Yeah, well, again, it depends on the product, right? Easy to install, easy to use, easy to learn, right? Easy to back up. And so you start to realize, like, when they say, God, I need it to be easier, like, you have to dig past the word easy. It's not about being easy. It's about being easier than what? and what is the real problem. And most of the time people can't tell you what they want. They can only tell you what they don't want. Meaning I'll say, well, what do you mean by easy? They're like, I don't know, just want it easy. And then you just reframe the question and say like, so what's hard? And they're like, oh my gosh, I can tell you what's hard. Boom, boom, boom. And they can tell you 15 reasons why it's hard.
Yeah.
So part of it is to realize like you have to be able to understand the language that the customer has and uses, not try to educate them about your words, but for you to understand their words.
In the process, let's say, of ideation, once you have the jobs ready, let's say you have 3-4 jobs, I've been doing a research. So we applied the quantitative method so that we understand the revenue impact of various jobs.
Yes.
Because you have the hush blankets, right? They have the job for help me have a normal life, help me sleep well without being knocked out by the sleeping pills. You have the job of the cuddling effect when I'm feeling lonely. So they had different jobs, and then we looked over the total customers. We've made online surveys to understand which are the main reasons, pinpointing which are the main reasons, and then we've seen what was the revenue impact, and 65% of the revenue was coming from a single job. So I think doing this type of quantitative research afterwards is also helping, because if you don't do that, there are many people within the company stating, but maybe there are 25 jobs. So in order to do so, you need to have some data for their
well, and I think the other part is that most people think that I can sit in a conference room and I know the customer enough that I can dream up the jobs. And in the 30 years of doing it, I would tell you, I can't do it. It's very hard to do. And to be honest, I've never seen anybody be successful, because what happens is when you're in certain contexts, you're willing to take different trade-offs and almost be irrational in different ways. Right. And so part of this is being able to really understand kind of what are the sorry, I lost my train of thought. We had something. We're live streaming in some way, so I don't know what just happened.
It's my man here, Flo, realized that he hasn't pushed a button, and now
the start button on the other part. But we're recording it, so we're still good.
We're recording it.
Got it. But it's where were we? What were we talking about? I get this.
We were talking about the left brains of the ones within the company that think that they know what the jobs are.
That they can tell you the job. And the quantitative part is actually, I think, important, so you can actually prioritize where you need to go for your opportunities and what you need to do. But here's the thing is, like, this is where, like, being dyslexic, people would say, like, well, just write a survey and put it out there. And I would always say, look, I'm not smart enough to write the survey because I don't even know the right questions to ask. So the way I talk about jobs research is it's the hypothesis building research. So I actually don't go in with any hypotheses, but I come out with a bunch of hypotheses that then I can go quantify. And so that's the thing that I'm really trying to actually do is realize, like, so all of my mentors would say, like, they were all very humble people. And it's one of those things where I realized, like, there's way more unknown than there is known. And the fact is that I can almost guarantee that, one, I'm biased, and two is that I don't understand empathetically exactly what they're going through. That's why I need to go through the interviews. But once I have the interviews and I can see the variables, it's almost like, I think Clay said it once, he goes, it's, jobs, going into trying to see the jobs, it's almost as murky as mud. But once you actually see the jobs and you look backwards, they're almost as obvious as the air we breathe, right? And it's one of those things where it seems very obvious, but going in, you just didn't really know the subtle differences of it. So like yesterday, we did one on somebody who's building a community, and we came back with 3 different jobs, and one job was really about people had an experience and they wanted to be able to share it in a community of people who also had experiences. So it was way more about sharing. And so they used this word, like, I want to be able to share my experiences. But then there was another group that talked about sharing their experiences, but they shared their experiences to help others. And so you started to realize, like, there was actually, it's very, very subtle difference, but this notion of people who want to share so others can actually do something with it versus people who want to share because They want to be seen and heard. And as subtle as that seems, it changes the entire feature set that we're actually trying to actually build around it, depending on whether you're trying to help people learn or whether you're trying to share. And so that's the thing. And both of them use the word share, but they meant very different things of why they wanted to share. Right? That's the trick here, is finding the important, meaningful subtleties.
Yeah, I think this causal layer that you're talking about, it's so hard to access, but once you access it, it's like in hindsight, everything looks clear, as you've said.
I always say it's like a pair of night vision goggles, or like seeing the Matrix. It's just one of those things where you kind of go like, wow, and you can actually see like when this and this and this are happening, is like, yeah, I can tell you what's going to happen next, because you know the causation part, which most people would say are random, right? Like, it's so funny. Like, we're doing these interviews around people who switch companies or switch positions, and it's like, well, it just happened to randomly meet this person and do this and that. And as they lay out the whole thing, is like this. I got my last job as a real, and then when you actually do the interview, there's very clear causal dominoes that had to fall for them to even be open to finding another job. So interesting.
One aspect regarding this ideation phase, after you have the data, after you have the jobs, is how you come up with the priorities, right? Because you have so many ideas, and there are so many things that you could be doing. And what I want to address together, Bob, is how you do this type of let's say prioritization. And how you say, okay, this is the idea. Let's focus on this or the other, and how you transform the jobs in marketing, let's say, because basically, let's say for a company, the reason that they are doing this, of course, is to improve certain KPIs, revenue, customer lifetime value, whatever that is.
Yep. So I think the aspect to me is that there are different methods and tools that I use to help prioritize, and one of them is basically something called an interrelationship diagram, and I use this as what I call the natural priority of the work, or the how to sequence the work. And a lot of times people will have an idea, right? And so for example, if I have 3 really different ideas to try to go after one job, this is where I'll use a tool like Pew Concept Selection, which helps me kind of map the hiring criteria against the features and benefits of each of the concepts, so that I can actually understand fit of what are the trade-offs I have to make. And it actually uses it as a design tool to do that. And so that's the first part of it. The second part, though, is that in a lot of cases, the way we build, we build by either the things we know to the things we don't know, or the hardest to the easiest, or the easiest to the hardest. And what I was taught very early is that anything that I'm trying to build has a natural order to how it should be built. Just like something has a natural order of how you take it apart, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same of how you put it together. So like building something is different than tearing something apart. And so, and I know that sounds obvious, but it's a very important subtlety of being able to take the time to understand the interdependence between things that you're building, and understand, like, if I build this thing, it's going to help me with this other thing. So like if I build the engine, it'll help me with the transmission. But if I build the transmission, it's not really going to help me with the engine, right? And so part of it is to realize what are the interdependencies there that then help me prioritize. So there's the whole aspect of understanding the demand side and the priorities from a progress perspective. And then there's a second set of priorities of what do I have to build in order to actually satisfy that? And then what's the sequence by which I have to do that? And so I have a new book coming out called Learning to Build, and it's the 5 essential or bedrock skills of innovators and entrepreneurs. And this is part of this, which is how do we actually understand cause and effect and interdependence? And the other one is how do we actually frame and manage trade-offs? Most people try to actually do everything perfectly, which makes you pretty much do nothing perfectly.
Yeah, I know a lot about that.
Yeah. So good question. Any other questions?
Sure. I have a question regarding the, let's say, once you have the ideation, once you prioritize, when you do marketing, I know from you that the best would be to use the struggling moment, right? To advertise for the struggling moment throughout from the whole buying timeline. Can you unpack this a bit?
So this is where what I would say is a lot of the way we're taught as marketers is the fact is to talk about features and benefits, and that we want those features and benefits to resonate with as wide a group as possible. So in most cases, marketing is trying to actually talk about what we can do for you, right? But we talk more about what the product is than what the product does. And at the same time, we usually talk about it at the very high level, so it's very hard to resonate. But what you start to realize when you do some of these interviews is you start to learn this little trick where if people get really good at describing the problem to you that you couldn't really describe yourself, and when they do such a great job at it, they're like, oh my God, that's exactly what my problem is, right? It's like, oh, like, because you described so well, they didn't even actually look at the features and benefits. They just bought the product because they finally had words to talk about the problem they felt, right? And so for example, I interviewed somebody yesterday about a product called Remarkable. It's like it's a notebook that feels like paper, right? And one of the things he talked about was that he would talk about writing on the iPad and how uncomfortable it was. And I'd be, what do you mean? And he's like this, he's got his elbow up. And he's like, I have to write like this because I can't touch the iPad because it does. And you start to realize like, it's just not and he would say, it's like, I want it to be like paper. Well, it's not paper. It's the fact that he wants to put his hand down and write naturally and do these other things with it. And so part of it is being able to understand those struggling modes. So the moment you say is like, still uncomfortable writing on an iPad, maybe it's time for Remarkable, right? Like it's normal paper, right? But you have to actually acknowledge the fact that it's awkward, because most people don't even acknowledge that the iPad is awkward to write on.
Yeah, excellent. So I have to ask you a question, Bob, regarding the overall perspective on this timeline. So basically, how do you address differently the customers which are already there? So how do you optimize the customer lifetime value? How do you optimize for retention for customers that have already got through the experience, knowing what is the job to be done?
That's right. So this is where what you have to do is understand that every time somebody buys something from you and they solve a problem, they make progress. So think of it as almost like a list. They have a long list of problems. They tick this one off the list. It goes to the bottom or goes away. Then there's another thing. And so part of it is to actually understand the sequence of struggling moments, because every innovation solves one struggling moment, but usually causes another struggling moment, right? And so, for example, like we were able to kind of combine the PDA and the iPod and the telephone into the iPhone, right? But then we had another struggling moment, which is battery life. And then we started carrying around cables and chargers and batteries and all. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, the other struggling moment was like the camera's not that good. So you start to realize, like at some point in the very beginning, people bought it as a matter of convenience of putting 3 devices together. And now they're actually buying it because it's a better camera. And so it's that evolution of kind of how people are going to evolve. And as you solve one problem, how do you actually highlight another? So for example, like if you're doing the blankets, right? I now sleep better, but the reality is like carrying it around is really hard. So maybe I need one downstairs and one upstairs, or one in the bedroom and one in the, so once you know it works, it's like, it creates like, oh, I got to lug it back and forth. So how do you actually know when they're ready for another one? Right. And so this is the thing where when they know it works, then they start using it in new places. And that's where you have to know kind of where do people take the product or to the service.
Yeah. Bob, I have to ask you a question regarding helping customers make progress in their lives. We have applied the jobs method on a company that is selling turmeric shots, right? We identified that they thought that.
Is it dose?
These are like small shots that you take in the morning, and we realized that the main job to be done was help me have a normal life so that I can be able to walk again. It wasn't about doing sport or anything. The people had joint pains, and we decided together with the brand to build a brochure so that we can do the extra mile. So basically, the whole thing was to carry on for a few weeks until they see the effects, right? Because nature is not working like the pills, right? It's not like you take them and instantly the pain is gone. However, you don't have the side effects. And in order to help them carry on, we decided to print some brochures about how to get rid of pain, not only through the turmeric shots, their product, but other tips regarding nutrition, regarding sports, regarding other things. Do you think this can be applied successfully? Do you think this is a good idea to sustain your to do this type of extra mile?
So and I wouldn't actually say it's the extra mile. It's actually the mile they need, because we keep thinking our product is the solution, but when you look at it through the customer's eyes, it's only part of the solution. And so this is where you have to realize they have to either learn something or they have to do something, or I mean, if they buy it and they don't drink it, it doesn't work. and they can blame themselves all they want, but they're not going to buy it again if they never take it. And so part of this is to realize you have to be responsible for the entire experience, not just them buying it. And that's really where I think the difference is between what I would say are regular product people and extraordinary product people, is they understand that their product or their service is just part of a bigger thing, and they know how to put themselves in it. So for example, when I built houses, I knew one of the biggest struggling moments was moving and storage. And so I actually included that as part of my thing. So I don't want to be a moving and storage company, but I realized, like, for people to buy my house, they had to move out of their house. And the more I understood that I had to have part of my business had to have a moving solution and a mortgage company and these other things to help people make that progress, it's just building the house alone was not enough. And so I'm a very firm believer of realizing I might not have to do that all, go the extra mile myself, but I might have to build relationships with what I would think are analogous or partners that in other businesses that I can help, but they can help me as well.
Yeah. We have a question from Catherine. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
I was just wondering, Bob, when you kind of figure out that struggling moment, like in the moving houses that you were just talking about, I guess in that instance, it was probably easier to measure the success of that initiative, but sometimes it might be something that's a little more subtle. So how do you demonstrate the success of finding that struggling moment in terms of like measurable ROI?
So I just did it for this person who's building a community, right? And their struggling moment is like, I belong to a community, but I don't feel comfortable sharing because people will judge, right? And so once we actually did that, is like, my thing is the way we've described it now in the marketing is like, you've got a lot to say, but you're still worried about how to say it. Come to our community and we'll let you be you. Right? Because the struggle, they can identify with it almost immediately. And so part of this is being able to understand versus somebody else, which is like, I've been helped by this, I want to help others. And how do I actually then understand, like how do, what can I do? Like, it's almost like volunteering. How can I volunteer to help in this community as opposed to how can I share in this community? And so those subtleties become very, very important in how we actually both advertise for it. And to be honest, we have to prototype. Like, I'll say this, we don't know out of the hat, and it almost seems like it's obvious what the next thing is. But what we end up doing is describing kind of what are those essential moments, and then how do we prototype the right language to make sure it resonates with people, right?
That's right. Bob, I have to add something here regarding some mistake that I see over and over again in this landscape of retailers and e-commerce companies. They think that their job is done once they ship the product. So they are not closing the loop. They are not aware if the customers are happy about it. And what almost all of the companies are doing are starting to bombard their first-time customers with emails to buy again from us. Here's a 10% discount. Here's a 5% discount. And I think the consumption should precede the second purchase. Because if people are not actually consuming your product, if they're not happy about it, how they can buy another product from you?
And I think we need to make it easier to give feedback, because what happens is like there's people will send me things and they want to, and they're like, we willing to give feedback? I'm like, sure. And then they give me a 20-page, questionnaire that I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like they're just not necessarily thinking. Like I almost, like, one of my favorite things to do is to have somebody will come say like, oh, I got a survey put together. I'm like, okay. I'm like, take it for me. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I want you to take it. It takes them 15 minutes to do it. I'm like, what customer has 15 minutes to take this thing? Like what are you really trying? And what they're doing is they're just keep adding more and more questions, because, oh, if I know that, then I'd like to know this, and I'd like to, and they don't realize, like, they have to almost think of the survey from the customer's side.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think all of that plays a role in trying to figure that out.
Yeah, and the problem is is so big that we've been looking at the benchmarks, and we have the average customer retention in e-commerce is 23%. So that means 2.3 people out of 10 are actually buying again for a company, despite the fact that it's a short-term product.
Yeah, but here's the thing: is I just think there's some unrealistic expect. Like I know we wish we had that higher, but that might be the nature of how the business is.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where people want to say like, well, we need to make that number higher. And my thing is I think I can experiment to do that, but it's the nature of the product. It's the nature of where, like, what you're selling. It's about the breadth. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other factors involved in it that you just can't brute force it. And so that's where I think the notion is being able to understand how does consumption connect to repurchase, and what are the expectations, and like being able to understand what caused somebody to say today's the day I'm going to buy another one versus buy the first one is sometimes maybe a completely different story.
Yeah,
so you have to go listen to that one.
Yeah, it is. That's why when we apply jobs to be done, it's only for repeat customers, which are loyal, because that's what they want to optimize for.
And the way I would describe it is if I know what got people who are repeat customers now were not repeat customers before. So what caused them to come back over and over again? And then how do I extend that to the other ones who are right now not, repeat customers? And so my thing is it's a causation problem of us understanding the causal mechanisms to get people to repeat. And sometimes it's not us, it's them that cause it to happen.
Yeah, it's not in your control, and you can't do anything. Right. Anything about it. In a previous episode together with Dennis, we talked about a company which is selling magnolias to people that you can plant to commemorate someone that just passed away. So you can't do the retention over there, right? It's like it's not in your control.
Well, so here's what I would say is, if this is about creating memorable events, the fact is it could be that one could be for a person, but then you could actually have something else for an event, right? Yeah. So there's other places where it's about creating or evoking a memory, and most people think about it as people like, well, you're only going to buy one for one person, but there's a lot of things you want to remember.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And so they keep thinking like, well, we want them to buy multiple things for the same person, or multiple flowers for multiple people, but it might be actually they move from the people business to the event business, right? Like, this is when I got married. This is the azalea bush for when we got married. Like the same, it's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So there are things that you can control. There are things that you can't control. So Bob, we are at almost at the end of this session, and I want you to share with us if you would be giving an advice to your younger self. What would that be? So what would be the job to be done that you've neglected for? In the past.
So the piece of advice I'd give myself, my younger self, would be one, know your strengths, Bob. Know what you're good at, and know what you suck at. And to be honest, figure out how to do more of what you're good at, and steer yourself clear, or find people around you who love to do the things you suck at. That and like I've been able to do more in the last 10 years than I had done in the previous, I'll say 40 years, primarily because I only do the things I'm good at, right? Like I was taught that you should always get better, but there are certain things where I spent an hour a day for 35 years trying to learn how to spell as a dyslexic. That's 7 hours a week. I got almost 8 hours a week back by giving up and saying, look, I don't have to learn how to spell. I could actually figure out some other way to spell. And so my thing is it's not that you should, not try to get better, but realize there are certain things that if you're really good at one thing, there's a liability with associated with, like, if you're a really good strategic thinker, likelihood that you're good at details is pretty low. Right. And so there's some physics of the situation. So my thing is I would tell myself not to worry about what I'm not good at, and figure out how to find people who love to do the things that I'm not good at, and don't worry about what other people think, but focus on helping people make progress. That's the big thing. The more I can help people make progress, the more I'm actually able to have an impact on the world.
Excellent. So, Bob, thanks a lot for being here today with us, and thanks everyone for watching. And
it's always good to hang. We were talking quite often in the fall, and then just a whole bunch of things happened, and so it's good to kind of reconnect and make sure that we've got some time together. And I appreciate all the questions. Thank you, Catherine, for your questions as well.
Excellent. So that was it, everyone. See you in the next episode, and all the best from Bucharest, Bob.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.